Hello and welcome to Bob Reeves Brass. I'm John Snell. It's so great to have you joining us wherever you are around the world on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. We are going to talk trombone today, and I'm so honored to have as a special guest today who was recently featured on our Trombone Corner podcast, studio trombonist Alan Kaplan. Let's bring Alan here. Hey Alan, how you doing?
Good, John. How are you doing?
Oh man, as they say, pandemic okay.
Good.
Happy,
Good.
healthy, all things considered. And how
Yeah,
about yourself? You staying
I'm
busy?
okay. Yeah, staying healthy, luckily.
Oh, good. And it was so honored to have you on the podcast recently. We had a
That
great
was fun.
response, and can't wait to do this live at some point.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So, for those of you who are viewing, let us know in the comment section where you're watching from. We're going to be here for the next half hour, 45 minutes with Alan. It's always great to see where people are viewing this from around the world. We already have Australia checking in and Europe. So, greetings,
Great.
good night, good
Cool.
morning. And most importantly, if you have any questions for Alan, throw them in the comment section. I'll be following them here and we'll be able to answer your questions live. So, Alan, let's get started. Would you talk about what you've been doing during the shutdown? I mean, you haven't been doing any live performing, so are you staying busy at home doing any projects?
Yeah, what I started doing at first, before when everything was dead, was started doing more recording all the parts for Hoyt Bohannon arrangements. I did an album 10 years ago called Secrets of Hoyt's Garage, where I did a whole bunch of his arrangements doing all the parts, and there were many more of those arrangements. That was just the tip of the iceberg. So I had many more that I had planned to do, so I started recording more. So I'm working on the fourth one right now, the fourth arrangement, Tosca, as a matter of
Ooh.
fact, which I really want to put a lot of time into that one. And I thought I'd have some more done by now, but a couple of things have happened. We've started going back to work remotely, so I'm working on quite a few of the TV shows that I was doing before in the studio. The animated shows luckily have lots of product. They can shoot those. Actors are simply doing voice acting, and the animation is being drawn, so they can keep producing them. So I'm doing the shows I've been doing, like a Mickey Mouse cartoon, uh, Family Guy, American Dad, and Animaniacs, which is a reboot from the series we used to do in the '90s. So these have all been going on, fortunately, and doing some Star Trek and a couple movie projects. So I've been somewhat busy, not as busy as I would be if I were still working in the studios, but I've been busy working from home
Well, that's
remotely.
good. That's good having some projects. Now, I mean, can you talk about what it's like I mean, you've been in the studios for decades. What's it like having to sit by yourself at home putting a part down? Like, what do you do?
Yeah,
How do you, I mean, obviously you're playing at 100%, but how do you get in? You don't have the vibe of a studio.
no, it's pretty tough too, because some situations they're giving us something to play to, like other players that have put their parts down, but in most situations, no. So we're just trying to lay it down the way we think it's going to meld the best. They have a demo track we can follow, but you can have a demo track and you can have a written part with every possible notation as far as where to cut off the notes, what the volumes are, but it's still not the same as playing with other people. So there's a little bit of guesswork, and I'm just trying to put everything right down the middle of where I think that's what the intent was, and hope that other players that are stacking with me will do the same.
Yeah.
But that's up to the people at the other end to put together, because we can only do what we can do this way. It's different.
So just like logistically, so what is it? Do you get like a click track, or do you get other, tracks from what other musicians have performed? How does
Oh,
that
I
work?
see. I see. Well, they send us a MIDI click track, sometimes just click. So we definitely get the click track, and we'll get the bar count. And also, we get the parts, by the way. They send us PDFs of our parts, so that's easy. We print out the parts to read from. And they'll give us a click track to follow that is synced with all the tempo changes and all the bars, so we know where we are. So it makes it easier to start and stop wherever we have to punch in. And it depends, like I said, with the audio tracks, if they have other musicians already recorded, like rhythm tracks, like on Family Guy, he always has the rhythm tracks done before he has me do my part. So I at least can go with the rhythm section.
Hmm.
Some of these things, there might be a solo. There was one movie we did that was all synth except for a solo violin. It's like, well, that didn't do me much good because the trombone never went with the solo violin. So it was kind of like, I'm going to turn that off because it just gets in the way of what we're trying to do. So, the good news is you have the flexibility to adjust the levels of what you need to play to all yourself. That's the good part. But the bad part is you only have what they send you.
Yeah.
And sometimes what they're sending us isn't quite what we really need to play best.
Yeah.
And and everybody has their own brand of how they send files, so that's kind of another story in itself.
So were you comfortable with recording software, and what do you use? Pro Tools or
I use Pro Tools. Yeah, I use Pro Tools. I'm pretty comfortable with it because I've been doing it for so many years. I mean, I started doing it, about a year before I did the Hoyt's Garage album. So I had learned all that stuff back then. So I'm pretty comfortable and adept. I'm certainly no engineer, but I learned how to at least record myself and deal with the tracks, deal with sending files and all that. So, the editing and other things get more interesting, but I've learned. Yeah. If you go, a million people you can learn from, and now there's YouTube tutorials galore. So it's not that difficult.
Oh, well, it's good. Yeah, we've all had to kind of expand and do different things and make and do. Yeah. So that's But it's glad to hear that there's work happening and stuff's moving.
Yeah, there's some going on. Yeah.
I remember when we recorded the podcast, that was over Zoom, a month or two ago, and everything was just shut down. I mean, we were all sitting at home twiddling our thumbs. So one of the questions came in on Twitter. Now, this is a cool thing that we usually only do these to Facebook, and we've gotten more advanced this week, so we're going to Twitter and YouTube as well. So,
good.
As I said last time, I have more technology than I'm licensed to use here. But we have a question coming in on Twitter about it's COVID related. So, what about your practicing now? Since you aren't driving around as much, not as much live playing, has your practicing been affected in terms of being stuck at home?
No, in fact, it's been good in that regard. I've been able to practice plenty, getting a lot accomplished. And it's a little tough to be motivated because I know I'm not going to be doing a lot of playing. I don't know that I have the endurance right now. If I were to do a gig with a big band, for example, all night playing lead, I probably don't have the stamina I would have had. But I'm working on my doubles because I never know from any of the things I'm doing at home what I'm going to have to play. So I'm trying to stay on top of things. I've always been a practicer. I don't let a day go by, and I try to cover all my instruments, the tuba, the contrabass, trombone, euphonium. I'm trying to do that, and hopefully I'm okay. It's,
Well, thanks for being honest.
Sure.
And that's, nothing replaces playing with your colleagues and being in the heat of battle, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah. When Noah checked in, even though he couldn't join us live, he's sending me text messages for follow-up questions. So he wants to know what your favorite recording session is, or was, I guess.
Okay. Well, I have to say, my favorite movie recording session and my favorite score that I played on was Silverado with Bruce Broughton. That was a very, very special score. And just the whole process, there weren't too many edits. That was back before Pro Tools. So we would do a 5-minute cue, and we would do all 5 minutes of it. So you were deathly afraid to make a wrong entrance and make the poor French horn player who had this ridiculous stuff have to play it again. And what Bruce Broughton wrote on that was just so thrilling. That stands out in my mind. Mm-hmm. I have to say that's probably number one of all for me.
It's hard to top that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I mean, people think of Star Wars or some of the classic movies for soundtracks, but Silverado for brass players. I mean,
exactly. I think for brass players in particular, it's special. There's so many wonderful scores, and I've been lucky to play on a lot of them. But that one in particular does it for me.
Wonderful. There you go, Noah. So even though he couldn't join us. So we got James checking in on YouTube. And for those of you who are just joining us, we are here live with Alan Kaplan, answering your questions live. anything about studio playing. I mean, Alan's played with the who's who of big bands and Hoyt's Garage. I mean, so much great stuff we can get into. So James is asking over on YouTube, everyone has a classic Buddy Rich story. Some that can be told, some that can't. But James wants to know if you can share one of your favorite or fondest memories on Buddy's band.
Well, there were a lot of them, but there was one with me that stands out. You know, Buddy could be... He's famous for what you've heard, the tapes of him screaming at the band and losing his temper. That's all true, but he also could be a very, very kind man. So I want to say that we had a good relationship. But he liked to, can I say, bust balls. So he got me really good one time. We were playing at Dartmouth College, and I had that West Side Story solo. That was the big first trombone solo in the book. Came at the end of the night, the end of the second set. And I normally got through it okay. This one particular night, I had blown my chops out before that on this other solo that I played. I got to it, I said, uh-oh. And sure enough, I cracked it pretty good. I missed the high D pretty badly. And when it was all over, Buddy went down and introduced me. Al, take a bow. And then, Al, take another bow. Take another one. He made me take 3 bows on the night that I screwed it up like horrendously. Any of the nights that I played it great, sometimes he wouldn't even say a word. He wouldn't even mention me. But that night, he had to stick it to me. So that was one.
That's a good one. That's a good one. And also, and I should plug the Trombone Corner podcast, because we got into a little bit about how you got onto Buddy's band and your first gig, and there was some great stories on there. Trombonecorner.com, and check out the whole episode. Because I mean, I think it was over an hour on that. That was a great, and we probably could have gone another 4 hours or so. So we'll do volume 2 at some point.
Okay, fine.
And then you couldn't. What would be a trombone Q&A without talking about gear? So let's get geeky. What gear are you using? Let's go down the line. Mouthpieces, horns, doubles, you name it.
Okay. Well, my regular trombone is still the Canstel 2102 that I 1602 with that I worked with Zig, fortunately. 1602 that he let me develop with him, and it was patterned after the bell taper from an old Tommy Dorsey King that I inherited, and then pretty much everything else we've built from the ground up. So that's my regular tenor trombone. The mouthpiece I've been playing now for over a year it's AR resonance mouthpiece, made in Italy, and I love these mouthpieces. I have them for all my horns now. I mean, this is my large bore. This is my large bore Canstel trombone, and this is a convertible. I can remove the valve section on this, play a straight horn if I like, and this is the large bore mouthpiece by AR Resonance. I also have a Conn 62H original bass trombone that I play with an AR Resonance mouthpiece that I switched to after 40 years with my Burt Herrick that I played. I prefer the AR. I have a Jinbao contrabass trombone, and I have a Yamaha Euphonium 321 I've had for a long, long time. And also a Bach bass trumpet, and I play a Jupiter 3/4 B-flat tuba. And that's about it.
Beautiful.
And a P-bone. And a P-bone.
And a P-bone. Everyone's got a P-bone.
I have a P-bone.
And then it's just, I mean, as you mentioned, you're doing home recording and stuff like that. What kind of microphone do you use, and what's that setup?
Okay, that's the best part. Years ago, I was able to get a hold of 2 original RCA 44 ribbon microphones.
Whoa.
All the guys, my heroes, I was just starting out. I was in my 20s, and all the guys were saying, these are the best trombone mics to record on. If you can ever get one, you should get one. So I found out about a guy that did mic repair, and he had one for sale. So I went and bought it. It was like $900, which now is nothing. And he said, when he checked me out and realized I wasn't a collector who was just going to flip it or just stash it, he said, I got another one too, if you like. So I bought 2. So I've had these RCA 44 ribbons for a very, very long time. Once in a while they get refurbished, but they're great. They really are a fantastic trombone mic.
What fun.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, great question, and yeah, especially like since we're all at home recording, a lot of people are asking and wondering, but not kind of difficult to pick those up on eBay these days.
Yes, but there are AEA, the company AEA in Pasadena. They make new absolute replicas of them, so they're available, just not by the original RCA's. And there are also many other models of ribbons, but in general, ribbon mics seem to be the best for trombone. You might get some other opinions from other people, but my circle of people seems to agree that Royer or other AEA ribbon mics seem to be, Cole's another one, seem to be preferable to most of the players I know.
Great. We are here live with Alan Kaplan. It's so great. We have people checking in. Bruce from Oklahoma City, Chad all the way down the 10 freeway in Fullerton. Actually, it's been so long since I've driven, I don't even remember how to get to Fullerton. Where's that? Is that out the 10? That's out down that way somewhere. Dave Helton checking in. Dave was on the Trumpet podcast. He's down in Sydney and did one of these Q&As. Oh, fabulous trumpet player with the London Symphony. You might have heard of him. So hey, Dave, great to see you checking in. So everyone that's at home viewing this, let us know where you're viewing from. And of course, the most important part, we have Alan Kaplan here. Ask your questions. This is your chance to pick his brain. And for those of you that listen to the Trombone Corner podcast, what did Noah and I forget to ask? This is your chance to do our job. So ask questions away, whether you're watching on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook. I'm reading all the comments and questions, and let us know. So the next one came in from Instagram about it's advice for young players. What would you suggest a young player, what skills do they need to make it in the studios if they were coming out to LA or I guess one of the other, New York, one of the big recording places?
Right. I would say pretty much all of them.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I mean, because when I first started, there weren't that many players who would double tenor and bass trombone equally. There was still the old-fashioned thought that, oh, no, if you do that, you're not going to excel at either one. You need to concentrate. But when I was coming up, doublers were starting to happen, and the writing was on the wall. So I learned bass trombone. I started on tenor trombone. I was a lead trombone player on the road, but I got a bass trombone and really learned to do that. And now it is so commonplace that I couldn't recommend a player for a job, let's say, that I can't do and they need to be replaced, or I'm asked to hire section players to work with me. I can't recommend someone who doesn't double because we don't know what the music is going to entail. It used to be pretty much people learned to compose for acoustic instruments, but now people are learning to compose, electronically and then orchestrating it for real instruments. So they're not too adverse on the range of the instruments. So we are often written extremely low. We might all be called to play first, tenor trombone and everything was way below the staff. So you really need to be able to play all of the required doubles if you want to have a chance in the business. Because it's not just for the studios. It's not just for studios. Theater, which hopefully will come back, has been cut down the size of the group so much. It used to be 2 or 3 trombones on all the shows and all the pit orchestras. Now it's 1, if at all. And that one chair now often involves tenor and bass, constantly, and some other instruments too, tuba. I've been on shows where there was tuba, tenor, and bass. It's the way of the world right now, and if you want to have a chance, you've got to have those skills available, or the next person who does have them will get the call. So that would be my advice. It's harder. It takes a lot more money to start off with all those instruments, but there is a commonality in brass instruments. A lot of the things that you learn about your embouchure, about your air, about articulation, on one instrument certainly carries over to the others. So a lot of it is common. When I'm practicing, if I'm going to be working on multiple tonguing or different things, I'll do it on one of the other instruments. I'll accomplish getting my bass trombone chops strengthened while I'm practicing my double tonguing exercise, let's say. Or doodle tongue, I'll do it while I'm playing euphonium. Anything you can do to try to keep all those instruments strong. Because the idea, when you come in on a job and you're playing an instrument, they don't see a disclaimer sign that says, this is my main instrument. You're not wearing that. They just hear how you play. So you have to have all of your instruments sound like it's your main instrument. And it's a lofty goal, but this is what I've always worked toward.
Yeah, great advice. And as you mentioned earlier, like in your practicing, you try to hit every instrument every day, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
pretty much.
amazing. What about stylistically? I mean, you don't know when you're showing up to a gig or a session what style and how many styles you have to play. So how do you cover that ground and being so adverse in that regard?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. It comes from listening to a lot of different players. I at one time when I was studying learned to emulate other people's vibratos by recording myself and trying to duplicate them. So for that part, in terms of vibrato, that was one thing that I worked on with a very conscientious method. But as far as other phrasings and styles, you just hopefully get a sense when you're listening to players do it, how they're doing it. So you can't just be a one style musician. I've heard people say, "Oh, I'm just a classical player. Or I'm just a jazz player." No, 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 no. We don't know what we're going to play. So part of it is equipment. Like I show up for every job that I don't know what I'm going to play with my large tenor, my small tenor, and my bass trombone. Those are the big three. If I need other instruments, generally I'll be told I'll need them. But those three come with me everywhere, and very importantly, the appropriate mutes. They can throw everything out. If you don't really know how the mute tunes your horn, you put a straight mute in on a bass trombone and it's sharp, and you didn't know, you're dead in the water. So you have to, be practicing. I've learned all my mutes with all my horns. I have different cut mutes for the two different tenors because they sound differently, they pitch differently. And it's just, you learn from experience, but you have to have your ears open to it. I remember that I can tell you this one story. One of the greatest musicians LA has ever seen is Chuck Finley, trumpet player. I think arguably he's one of the most talented players this town has ever seen. And I got on my first record date, and Chuck was there. And we had very specific phrasing, dots and dashes written all over the notes. Longs and shorts were written. The copyist had painstakingly put all them in, but they were kind of funny the way they was. And I listened to Chuck play first read down without even trying to read exactly how it was marked. He played it a different way, and it sounded great. And I asked him about that. I said, "Well, Chuck, I noticed you didn't play the phrasing that was there, but what you did sounded great." He says, "Yeah, I'm just going to play it the way I think it should go. If they don't like it, they'll tell me." Most of the time, they end up liking it. So that was a big lesson learned on my very first day. I said, "Okay, these are decisions you need to make on the spot, because you can't approach it like it's classical literature that has been published and played for decades. You are looking at brand new music, hot off the press. You don't know what kind of thoughts went behind marking. The marking could have been just a last-minute effort to just make it look finished, but no real thought put behind it. So you have to be ready. You got to know the rules before you break them when it comes to phrasing."
Yeah.
So I personally am very quick to make changes like that if I think it's a musical one. If I'm playing first. Naturally, if I'm in a section, I follow the lead player. But if it's up to me, I'm going to try to make those changes I think makes it more musical. Because that's really the goal here. Yeah.
Yeah, great story. Great story about Chuck. Now, did you coincide with Chuck on Buddy's band, or was he?
No, he's before me.
He was before your time. Yeah.
Yeah, a few years. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah, but Matt, I mean, you've done hundreds of sessions with him since the 70s.
Yeah.
I mean,
since the mid 70s. Yeah.
Must have been amazing.
He fearless Finley, and he truly is.
Yeah.
He's a national treasure.
Yeah.
He really is.
Yeah. So great. It's like we're having a master class today. This is so awesome. I'm the luckiest guy in the world. This is how I spend my Wednesday afternoon talking and listening to stories and stuff. We are here live with Alan Kaplan. We have comments. A lot of people sending, showing love in the comments from all over the world. Europe checking in, the Netherlands.
Wow.
Yeah, we already had Australia, Japan are sipping their coffee. They're already into tomorrow. So let us know in the comments where you're viewing from. And, of course, if you have any questions, this is your chance. This is your chance to play podcast host. And here we go.
Bring it. Come on.
Actually, a good buddy of mine, Barry Goldberg, plays in the Lawyer Big Band with me. And so not to put you on the spot, Alan, but he wants to know if you will join the Big Band of Barristers and be a guest artist at some point.
Sure.
So there you go. So, you lawyers out there, I think we have an offer and acceptance. So
I need representation for it, but I will do it.
Well, it's a good place. There's plenty of good lawyers in that band.
Okay. All right,
me,
good.
not one of them. But there you go, Barry. We did it. Who else we have? Melissa checking in says hello. So this is so cool. We had a question coming in from Twitter. Again, this was about your sound concept. So, like, how did your sound develop? Did you have inspirations? You said you'd listen to players for vibrato, but how did your sound develop?
That's a good question. I can't say for sure. I mean, I would always try to hear the best sound. I mean, I grew up listening to the marvelous sounds like of Lloyd Olliate. There's never been a better trombone sound maybe than what came out of Lloyd Olliate's bell. Mm-hmm. But I just try to go for the resonance. We all have a sweet spot of where we play, where you get the most resonance, where the most sound comes out for the least amount of air. A lot of us mess with our equipment to get that to happen. That's a big part of finding the right equipment match. But it's also a concept. How on a trumpet there's slots, and to find right down the center of that slot where it makes the sound open up. There are players that we know who tend to lean on the upper part of the slot or the lower part, and it brightens or darkens, but it doesn't resonate. So I've always tried to find that really resonant part of it. This goes back to what I heard George Roberts talk about, because George used to be the great proponent of long tones. And what he always talked about was that in doing long tones, if you do it long enough, you start to hear the resonance coming out of each note. And he was the master of resonance. I told this on the podcast, how he didn't play that loud and it would just record like crazy. But there's a lot to that. And I try to do that when I'm doing my long tones in the warm-up. I'm trying to get to that middle of the slot where the most resonance is happening. I'm always trying to find different sounds. Believe me, with equipment, I'm always trying to see if I can get a little darker or this and that. But that's just a lifelong goal. It's like trying to hit a better golf shot.
Yeah, interesting. So you'll experiment at home. I mean, you'll try different things just to see.
I've experimented with equipment for years. That's why it was fun when Zig Cansto asked me to work on a horn with him. I said, "Oh my God!" I was like a kid in a candy store. I had a whole factory at my disposal. I was going crazy trying everything I wanted to try. It was great.
Yeah, we miss Zig. I mean, he was institution here in L.A. and he goes back to that old generation. He was at Benj and then Olds before that, and that knowledge. Sorely missed.
He was a master.
Okay, YouTube. James is checking in again about the Ashley Alexander Big Band. Did you ever play with the LA Big Band?
No, I knew Ashley, but I never did play in that band.
Yeah, you're saying it was a very underrated band that everyone seems to have forgotten about. So
no, I remember. Yeah. I remember that band.
Yeah.
Ashley was great.
Yeah. What was that? Was that the 80s? I think that was before I remember.
Could be the early 80s.
The early 80s.
It's back. Could it be 70s? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Someone will let us know in the comments.
Yeah, somebody Google it. It's getting hard. The 70s and 80s are becoming a bit of a blur now.
Yeah. Someone said you did Don Ellis. Someone was asking on Instagram. Yeah. What was that? How did that come about? And what was it like playing with that band and 21/8 or some crazy time signatures?
It was fantastic. Like I had said at the podcast level, he was working after he had been ill, and Glenn Stewart was rehearsing his band, and I made a few of those rehearsals. But then Don recovered and started working with his band again, and he had his usual Glenn Ferris working with him, who did a lot of albums with Don. And one day I get a call, last minute, can you go down to Hungry Joe's down in the Huntington Beach area and play a sight read Don Ellis band gig? Glenn just split. He went to Paris. He left the country, left the band, done. And all of a sudden they're hung out to dry, so I had to go down and sight read this incredibly hard music. And, I'm sure it wasn't perfect, but I got through it pretty well, and then they asked me to stay on the band. This was, I believe, 1977. And it was a good time because that was the year of Star Wars, and one of the first things we did was do an album capitalizing on that called Star Wars and Music from Other Galaxies. And Don and a few other people did some of the not just arrangements, but compositions and arrangements for it. and that was great. We did that, actually recorded it at Sony. We also did a movie. I can't remember that. I think Assault on the Paradise. Anyway, so that was a movie scored by Don, which is a thrill to be able to do. And that's the first movie session I did with Lloyd Oye. Lloyd was brought in. They brought in some ringers, so to speak, and Lloyd was on that, so that was fun.
Oh man.
And then with Don, the best is we did a summer tour of all the jazz festivals. We also worked on the East Coast, and then went to Europe and then Montreux Festival and North Sea Festival, Berlin, lots of great things. And recorded a live album at Montreux. That was sensational.
What fun. What an experience. And actually, we have that Star Wars album hanging up on the wall here at the shop, signed by Don. So
cool.
I'll grab a picture of it on my way out and post it in the comments.
Okay.
That's a fun album. So yeah, and then, man, this is so cool. Oh man, we got a lot of questions coming in. James was saying, 1970s was Ashley Alexander. So
all right, good.
I'll have to tell you, I won't say how old I was in the 70s. So next question comes in is about articulation. Any advice, Alan, on how to improve speed and clarity with articulation?
Absolutely. First of all, for trombone players, it's vital that we do regular marcato, like double and triple tonguing, legato, double and triple tonguing, and I think doodle tonguing is very important. We got into this in the podcast because we have to articulate so many more notes as trombone players versus trumpet players or other valve instrument players. We need to be able to do more different kinds of tonguings. Doodle tongue is a natural phrase maker. You can naturally do a little bit of the ghosting and accentuating different notes just by doodle tonguing without trying to do that. It's a natural way. So it's really good for jazz phrasing. And what I like to do is what I was instructed by my teacher, Roy Mayne, with tonguing. The tongue, it's a muscle, like anything else, and has to be warmed up. So I think on anything you're working on, whether it be a scale pattern or maybe a jazz lick you're working on or whatever it is, very important to do it slowly, much slower than you're trying to get it to perfect it at, and nice and even. Then you go to work on it at whatever tempo you're trying to master. And then before you're done, after you've done that, kick the metronome up about 4 or 5 notches beyond that, and just go through it. It'll sound horrible, but the idea is you're kind of getting your brain used to the idea of going that fast. And what happens is it speeds up the process. You'll find that your median tempo suddenly has gotten faster. I found that to be very helpful. Working on tonguing, I do that regularly.
Great advice. We have Christine checking in all the way from Switzerland. And for those of you that are just joining in, we're here live with Alan Kaplan. And after we're done with this, if you're just joining in and you missed the first half hour, this will all be archived on Facebook, so you can go back and listen to all of the answers to our questions. And if you have friends that don't have social media, this will be archived also on Facebook, so you can send them your students there to watch all of Alan's great answers. So if some of these, some of the questions, Christine, that you've asked, we've already touched on. But one of them here, Alan, she wants to know, how did you get into studio playing? How did you make that breakthrough?
Okay, I was recommended. The best way to get into the studios is by other players of your same instrument recommending you. And I didn't ask them to. That would be improper. I was just fortunate. I got to play with a lot of my heroes very early on. Dick Nash, Lloyd Oye, George Roberts. Bill Broughton, who we just lost, unfortunately, was very helpful to me getting me my start with Bruce Broughton, his brother. At that time, Bruce was writing Hawaii Five-0, the original show. And thanks to Bruce, I was recommended to him, and I started doing Hawaii Five-0. And that's the best way. And other situations would come up where they couldn't do something, and they were asked. So that's how I got in. And then when you start doing hopefully you do a good job, you're called back. Sometimes it's a brand new thing. And then the contractors start to know of you as a reliable citizen. You're somebody that they know is tried and tested, and then they know that they can put you on other people's sessions. So that's kind of how it worked. And fortunately, a few of the contractors early on, after being told told that they could call me, continued to call me for other things. So it kind of blossomed from there. It snowballed. It's fantastic.
So yeah, you just have to have a reputation and hope someone calls at some point, and yeah, and then be ready, I guess is
you have to take every opportunity to play, be heard playing. Yeah. You know, I did a million rehearsal bands. I was doing 7 or 8 bands regularly every week. You know, there's no such thing as bad exposure. This is what I've always said, because it doesn't matter if the band you're playing with is bad. If you're being seen and heard, it's only good. The only thing that's bad is if you're playing badly, but it's always good. And people think about you. You know, there's so much out of sight, out of mind sometimes in this business. It's always good to be the person who's in sight and in mind.
Yeah. Great advice. Can we talk a little bit about Hoyt's Garage? Because, I mean, we talked about it on the podcast. We have a lot of people viewing, and like Darby checked in from Oklahoma, and he already listened and loved the podcast episode. Thomas from Austria said it was his favorite episode so far.
I know these names you're telling me. It's great.
Yeah, that's why I love doing these. It's like we have family all over the world checking in. Josh Lampkin says you're the man. So, but yeah. So for those of you, if you could talk, Alan, about what Hoyt's Garage was, Hoyt Bohannon, for those that didn't listen to the podcast, and then they can go and obviously check out the podcast to learn more. But I'd love to get more of that information out there, because here in LA, obviously, that was legendary. Hoyt was, a household name, and if you were a trombonist within 500 miles, you knew about it. But obviously, today is a different world. So would you mind talking about who Hoyt was and what Hoyt's Garage, why it's so important?
Well, Hoyt was a famous trombone player. He got famous playing with Harry James and recorded the hit solo on Sleepy Lagoon. And I think it was 1941. So when he got to town, he immediately got to working on staff at Warner Brothers. That's back when they had staff orchestras. So he was in the Warner Brothers Orchestra. And what he did, he and his co-workers, they got the idea, since on staff sometimes you didn't play that much. There might be a whole score with no trombones on it, but you had to show up anyway. And the other thing is, you know how sometimes the brass aren't too busy in some scores. So they had to figure out ways to keep in shape. So Hoyt started getting hold of some of these great film cues, just a cue here and there. And he'd get the conductor's sketch. And then he'd arrange it for trombones. He thought, gee, this would be a fun piece to write out for trombones and have a bunch of us get together once a week to play and just keep our chops up. So it started like that, somewhat informally. And it wasn't at his house originally, but it ended up there. But he started, it was his scene with some other people. And that was like 1947, I believe. Could have been 48. And it was legendary. And by the time I came along, I played with Hoyt when he subbed on the Harry James band with me at Disneyland when I was touring with the band, and he came and subbed because we had an empty chair at that point. That would be 1975. So we played. I had a lot of solos. I was doing a lot of stuff in that book, and he invited me to come play in the band, come play in his group when I was free, when we were off. So since 1975, I started being a regular member of Hoyt's Garage.
What fun! What fun! So, and who would be showing up on a regular basis?
Back then, at the very beginning, we had my teacher, Roy Mayne, was a regular there. Bill Broughton was a regular. Barrett O'Hara, Ron Smith, and occasionally Dick Knoll would show up, but very rarely. He was pretty much out of that. And we had Lauren Marsteller. Bill Toll was a regular there. And then and Jim Sawyer. Those were probably first guys, and Jim Boltinghouse. And we also had, besides Barrett, we had Morris Repass and Bob Sanders on bass trombone, Alan Johnson also on bass trombone. We had a lot of different people. I can keep coming up with names, but I'm just trying to think at the very beginning when I started doing it. More and more people. Bill Booth came to town, and he started doing it, and Bruce Otto, and many, many others.
What fun! What fun! And then you ended up doing an album, right? With using those transcriptions or those arrangements, things like that.
Right. Yeah. The thing with Hoyt's group is by the time I came along, he and Tommy Peterson were kind of co-leaders of the trombone band, and Tommy was writing his own original pieces. And the Wednesday night rehearsals would be one of Tommy's pieces, then one of Hoyt's arrangements, and we'd all rotate conducting. And we did, after Tommy had passed away, Jim Boltinghouse and his wife Debbie, they produced a record of all my concertos, of all Tommy's music that we used to do. And we all played the parts. And it was a lot of fun. And I got the idea, I'd really love to do this for Hoyt's arrangements. But a lot of things came to pass, and the attrition level of people in the group that no longer were around or left town. And I finally realized that if I'm going to get this done, I should just do it myself. Because by that point, that's when I was adept at recording, at home with Pro Tools and my mic. So, you know what? I can get this done myself. So that's what brought that about.
Yeah.
I would love to have done it live, but it's such hard music with so many players. We could be spending months and months trying to get it right.
Yeah, maybe one day.
Yeah, we used to do concerts of it with Hoyt a lot.
Yeah.
But they were far from perfect recordings. They wouldn't be what you'd like to put out on a record, but they were fun. The band was great.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was horrible by any means, but there would be clamps,
But that was the point, stretching you guys out.
Yeah.
Next question comes in from Instagram about, you were 19 when you joined Buddy's big band?
Yeah.
And youngest lead trombone ever, right?
Yeah, I was still 20 when I moved over to the lead chair.
Wow.
Yeah.
So any advice on playing lead trombone? What tips do you have? What makes a good lead trombonist in a big band like that?
Well, first of all, you're the lead trumpet of the trombone section. So my advice is listen to lead trumpet players. I had the great fortune of playing with some great lead trumpet players. John Madrid, who we lost many, many years ago, had come off of Buddy's band and was back playing in rehearsal bands and was playing at LA City College, where I was also playing besides my other college. And he was one of the most swinging lead trumpet players I ever heard in my life. And I listened to how he was phrasing, and I thought, wow, that just sounded right. So I feel like I learned the most about my phrasing ideas from John Madrid early on. Later on, of course, like I said, working with Chuck, John, Gary Grant, so many other wonderful lead trumpet players, Rick Baptist, Wayne Bergeron, there are so many great lead trumpet players. If I'm going to name trumpet, I got to name all of them. Anyway, wonderful players. But I follow lead trumpet players. That's what my advice would be to lead trombone players.
Yeah.
And be strong, because it is really, really taxing to be upstairs like that all the time. We don't get quite the rest the lead trumpet does. A lot of times you'll see the lead trumpet is laying out. Trombones are doing wallpaper. We're sitting there playing all the whole notes behind the solo while the trumpets are resting. So it takes a lot of stamina to be playing the lead book in a big band, the way it's often written out. And you'll see some of the bands have 5 trumpets, and a lot of the bands have 3 trombones, so you can do the math. There's a lot of trombones sometimes are working so hard. So you've got to do good range and endurance exercises every day. This is what I never miss a day of. If I do hardly any other of the practicing, I make sure I get that in. And I was doing that on the road. When I was on Buddy's band, playing all that hard stuff every night, I was still practicing. Because I knew that I had to be at my absolute strongest to not cave in from playing at that volume every night. Yeah. So that's why.
Great advice. And then a follow-up to that coming in, what about, you're talking about the upper register. Any tips for avoiding getting tension and getting a smaller sound as you're going in the upper register?
Well, that's so much of that, of course, is the air you have to use. But I can tell you this, a lot of times that comes from lack of strength. A lot of times, if your chops are weak and they're not efficient, you're having to push more air to get the same amount of sound. And that creates tension. So I think I don't practice loud because you're going to play loud on jobs so much of the time. I think it's best to develop your chops playing on the softer dynamics, not too soft. But for exercises like that, I like to practice mezzo piano, mezzo forte at the most, and build the sound and build the strength from there. Because if you have to pump it, you get on a job, you've already built the strength from playing it that way, and then you have that to fall back on. But if you're trying to play loud and practice loud, you're not building that foundation. In fact, there are a lot of things with practice that can cause tearing down of muscle. That kind of loud, spready playing, and also too much flexibility. I know people that they're working so hard at flexibilities and trills, and they don't realize that tears down muscle. You
Yeah,
know,
interesting.
there's a good mix of like of solid long tone building exercises and flexibility. The long tone building builds strength. The flexibility keeps it from being too stiff, because it's very easy to get stiff when all you're doing is exercises for long tones and building. But you have to find that balance. And that's what I like to use flexibility for, that to balance it, but not to overdo it.
Yeah, everything in moderation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Especially moderation.
Great question, and yeah, and great advice there. We are live with Alan Kaplan here. We have just a few more minutes before we wrap up, so if you have one last question you want to get in. And I mean, Alan, we'd love to have you back on at some point. And then maybe it was
I'll fit it in my schedule.
Fit it in your schedule, please. Yeah, we'll make sure Noah's there this time. Okay. So then you guys can totally geek out with the trombone.
We can talk an hour about spit valves, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. I've learned so much about tuning in slide and crooks and stuff that I thought trumpet players were crazy. My gosh.
Oh yeah, I had a minor in slide crook. I did my dissertation on that.
Oh, I love it. You brought up Roy Mayne, and just from a personal thing, I mean, I grew up with Roy and my dad's group, and could you talk about how Roy was as a player and teacher and what you learned from him?
Roy was fantastic. He was the best teacher I ever had, and a great friend, which was also wonderful, because later on, after I no longer was a student of his, we would work together a lot and hang out, and it was just like, he was just the greatest guy. And you never got that feeling. He was tough as a teacher, but you never felt that he didn't treat you as an equal. He was a wonderful guy, and his teaching method was great. He himself was such a good student. He studied with a lot of great teachers, Louis Maggio, and I'm forgetting, John Kleinman was another one of his, and Jimmy Stamp. And Roy learned the best from these guys. And because he was familiar with problems, he had problems along the way and learned how to fix them from these teachers and other people, that he became a great problem solver. If a guy came in and he's getting this kind of a sound or this kind of problems happening, Roy could kind of sit back, think about it for a second, and write out an exercise for you. He always brought a blank manuscript book with you to Roy's. He didn't have just one book that he would teach on, and he'd write an exercise in for you. So there were a whole bunch of us students at the same time, Roy's at that time, and we all had a different book. We all had a different routine, because Roy was patterning everybody's lessons about what they needed, and we'd always play a bunch of duets as part of the lesson, So I got to play with him a lot, and he would be tough. You never knew what he was going to ask. He would give you. His thing was to give you way too much for your following lesson, for the next week's lesson, way more than you possibly could get together. And he knew that. He just wanted to see what you could look up, but you never knew which of those things he was going to ask to hear. So you had to cover it all. And I thought, he was brilliant. It was way too much. But we did it.
Yeah.
We did it.
And
it was fantastic.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and then you show up for a session or something, and you're over-prepared because you're used to doing that much literature and that much different stuff.
Right.
Amazing.
And his method, like I told you about the 3 tempos for tonguing, it's like swinging 2 bats away, a batter in a batter's box on a baseball team. They swing the heavy 2 bats, so it makes the bat seem lighter. Same with tonguing, makes it seem slower when you practice faster. He had all these techniques about practice that I still use. And in learning my doubles, all the things that I learned from Roy have carried over to many other things that I never studied with him about. So,
yeah. Carries over into your own teaching. So yeah, Miss Roy, great.
Definitely.
Great player, great person. One last question, and then we'll wrap up here. And we could talk about so much because you do so much, Alan. This is about your jazz playing. Who was your jazz influences, and then tips about integrating your jazz playing, practicing changes and stuff in your practicing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, naturally, when I first came up, I was so enamored with Carl Fontana and Frank Rosolino. They were the 2 real prominent guys at the time that I was listening to, and were absolutely blowing me away. And J.J. Johnson. I was listening to a lot of Irby Green too at that time, and I really was mostly influenced, I think, a lot by Carl, And on Buddy's band, we had to play these ridiculously up-tempo solos. There was a wonderful player who was played first when I joined, a guy named Rick Culver. who unfortunately just passed away, and Rick was able to play double time through all these up tempos with Buddy. And I realized I'm going to have to do the same thing. So I was practicing being able to work out these things instead of practicing Arbon scales and regular exercises for double tugging. I was working on jazz licks. There's maybe a couple bar motif here and there, working on it in all keys, but working it up to speed. So by the time I got to be doing solos, I had all these different licks that I could just assemble. I wasn't improvising every note. I was assembling ideas that had already worked out. And a lot of the things I got, I stole from Carl Fontana. No question about it. No question about it. His use of passing tones. A lot of reasons that he can able to play so many notes is a lot of them are passing tones. He's actually thinking of the next note, but his passing note is just, he relies on it to get from A to C. It's just B in between. And there's a lot of that when you listen to a lot of great jazz musicians, you hear their use. And they're bridging their ideas together with passing tones. I also did a lot of transcribing. I was studying with Charlie Shoemake. Shoemake was one of the premier jazz teachers here in LA. Now he lives up in Cambria and still does that. And he really was hugely, effective for me. His way of memorizing jazz solos and taking down other people's ideas.
Yeah, great advice. What fun! I mean, we've almost done an hour. It's like it's flown by.
Wow, it sure has.
So, Alan, thank you so much. So the projects you're working on, the new transcriptions and stuff for Hoyt, those be available on your website? What's the best way for people to find you?
Well, yeah, I haven't released them yet. I want to do this fourth one, and I think I'll just put it out as a digital extended version of The Secrets of Hoyt's Garage.
Okay.
So I've got 3 of them done in master, but I'm going to wait till I get the 4th one done, and then we'll figure out what to do.
Well, we'll look forward to that. And with AlanKaplan.net is the or .org.
Actually, it's .org.
.org. That's right. AlanKaplan.org is the website, and then you also have a Facebook page where you post updates. Yeah, Alan Kaplan Music.
And a YouTube channel for whatever,
Yeah, got to be everywhere these days.
Yeah, that's right. Social media.
Well, Alan, thank you so much. It's been an honor to see you again, and
Thanks,
can't wait till we get to hang in person, and maybe we'll get a Noah involved that time.
Me too. Thanks, John. I appreciate
All right.
it.
Thank you so much, Alan.
Okay.
And thank you for watching. What an honor to have Alan today. I mean, what a great way to spend the afternoon talking trombone and Buddy Rich and studios and jazz and, I mean, all of that stuff. Alan knows so much. And with the Trombone Corner podcast, we had mentioned several times. If you haven't listened to it already, check it out. We put that up with the Brass Arc, Noah Gladstone. It's available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or right through your browser at trombonecorner.com. So listen to, I think we have 6 or 7 episodes up already. Jay Friedman, Martin Skippers from the Concertgebouw, David Rayano, L.A. Phil, Bob Sanders, who we mentioned earlier on bass trombone, Alan Kaplan was the most recent guest, and Leonard Paul of the Nozel Brass is coming up soon, so you won't want to miss the Trombone Corner. We'll also be doing more live Q&As in the future, so be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of the places. You know the routine. You don't want to miss out on these. We'll be doing a couple of these a week, and where you get to be the podcast host, basically you get to ask the questions and ask the questions that Noah and I forget to ask or, don't think about. So it's your job, your chance to do our job. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned, these will be archived on our Facebook page and on YouTube, so you can go all the way back to the beginning and watch the whole thing and see what you missed. Thanks again for joining us. Be safe, be healthy, and go out and practice, shall we? Bye-bye.